It's all too easy to overlook what some of the humble stock plugins can do within Cubase, and EnvelopeShaper is a case in point. Available in the Pro, Artist and Elements versions of the software, it can be something of a not-so-secret weapon when it comes to adjusting the character of your drum sounds. So, taking that as an example, let's explore what EnvelopeShaper does and what it has to offer in terms of shaping the character of the drum sounds within your mix. EnvelopeShaper is a dynamics plugin, so if you go looking for it in the Cubase stock plugin collection, you'll find it within the dynamics section, listed amongst the other entries there: compressor, de-esser, limiter and maximizer, and so on. It perhaps also sits in a category of plugins known as transient designers, so if you're looking at third-party options that do a similar job to EnvelopeShaper, you might see those described as transient designer plugins. It's most useful when used with a sound that has a distinct transient, and its simple control set lets you adjust the balance between the attack portion of the sound and the sustain portion of the sound, and that's why it's so useful with a typical drum sound such as a kick or a snare. So for example, with a snare you can add or subtract the contribution you hear from the initial crack, tack of the snare sound, and you can add or subtract from the sustained portion of the sound, including the rattle that you get off the bottom of the snares themselves. In essence then, what it allows you to do is shape the balance of the attack portion as opposed to the sustained portion of that sound. EnvelopeShaper has a very simple control set. Attack gives you plus or minus 20 dBs of gain adjustment for the initial attack element of the sound. We can add gain to the attack portion, or we can subtract gain from the attack portion. Length, as its name suggests, sets the length of the attack phase that's subjected to that gain adjustment, anywhere between 5 and 200 milliseconds, whereas the release control adds or removes gain from the release element of the sound as the sound fades out, making that sustained portion longer or shorter. I've got a simple drum recording here: kick, snare and hi-hat mics from Acoustic Drum Kit. Let's solo the kick for a moment. I've got an instance of EnvelopeShaper installed on it, but I'll bypass it to start with. Let's now engage the plugin, and let's just simply add to the attack portion of that kick sound. So emphasizing the beta sound, if you like, on the kick's skin. Or can de-emphasize it for a softer sound, depending on the character I'm looking for. Can make that a little bit more clicky if I shorten the length, or add a little bit of weight to it by increasing the length of the attack portion. And if I wanted a bit more boomy, allowing the sustained portion to breathe a little bit more. Note that this is an acoustic recording, so there's bleed from some of the other instruments into the kick mic, and if I want to, I can actually use the release control not only to tighten up the kick, but also to remove some of that bleed. So I've now got almost a very percussive kick sound. Back to the natural sound by bypassing the plugin. So you can hear the contrast there, the very strong emphasis of the transient, the shorter sustain release phase. Obviously I've exaggerated the settings I've used here just so that you can clearly hear them, but you can easily fine-tune to get the sound that you're after. Usefully, EnvelopeShaper ships with a whole bunch of presets, many of them targeting drums. So for example, there is a long kick preset. So you're basically adding to the release phase of the sound. Again, we can dial that out if we don't want to. Again, we can explore exactly the same process with our snare. Add to the attack of the snare, take some of the attack away, more of the rattle of the snare, or tighten it up. As with the kick drum, there are some suitable presets you can explore to get started. Now, like a compressor, EnvelopeShaper changes the dynamic range of the sound, but it achieves it in a somewhat different fashion. It's not sensitive to the input level threshold like a compressor has, and above that threshold the compressor kicks in. EnvelopeShaper is doing its thing all of the time to every drum transient, regardless of the input level of each individual hit on the particular drum that is being processed. So with drums, a compressor and EnvelopeShaper can complement each other quite nicely. So you could use a compressor to control the extreme peaks and achieve a more consistent level in the overall performance of an individual drum. And then EnvelopeShaper can be used after the compressor for additional control over balancing that attack and release phase of each hit, changing the emphasis placed on these different elements within an individual drum sound. Now, of course, you can apply dynamics control on drums at multiple points within the signal chain. Individual channels, like I'm doing here, but also on a drum bus. And you could use EnvelopeShaper on a bus. It's perhaps a little bit more difficult to find settings that work with multiple drums, something that works with the kick and the snare and the hi-hat and the cymbals and the toms and so on. But it's certainly worth experimenting with if you want to change the character of the drums. It's a very simple way to explore the possibilities. However, you get more control if you work on individual drum channels, the kick channel, the snare channel, the hi-hat channel, and so on. And with a multi-mic'd drum kit like we've got here, that's an option that's available simply by the way, the nature that the audio has been recorded. With a VST instrument drum source, I find it easier to configure multiple outputs from that VSTi into my Cubase mix console, and then I will use EnvelopeShaper within the standard Cubase mix console and approach the use of EnvelopeShaper with my VSTi instrument drum source in exactly the same way as I might approach that of a multi-mic'd audio recording of a drum kit. Incidentally, if configuring multiple outputs on a VSTi drum source is something you're not familiar with, I have an earlier video on that, and I'll link that down in the video description below. So let's look at a full kit performance example. In this case, I'm going to use Groove Agent SE. I've got a MIDI drum part here. Let's just play you back a few bars of that. And if we flip to the mix console, you can see that I've got Groove Agent SE set up using multiple audio outputs. Kicks come into its own channel, snares come into its own channel, toms, hi-hat, and so on. Now, I'm going to focus here just on the kick and the snare in terms of the EnvelopeShaper processing I'm going to do. I am just going to use EnvelopeShaper here. I could, of course, add other dynamics processing compressors to each of these channels before EnvelopeShaper if I wish to. And you'll notice that on the kick and the snare, I've actually got two instances of EnvelopeShaper. With all of these bypassed, we're just hearing the unprocessed drums as before. In the first insert slots, I've put a negative gain onto the attack, de-emphasizing the attack, and I've put a positive gain on the release phase to emphasize that sustained portion of the sound. And in the second insert slot, exactly the opposite. I put a positive gain on the attack to emphasize the initial transient of the sound, and then I put a negative gain on the release to de-emphasize the sustained portion of the sound. Now, I've exaggerated the settings I've used here just to make it very easy to hear the contrasts between what these different configurations of EnvelopeShaper are doing. But the interesting thing here is that what works is very much context dependent. So I've got this set at a tempo of 100 beats per minute. Let's just hit playback. I've got all of these plugins bypassed at the moment. Let's hear the drums out of processing. Let's now engage these upper two instances of EnvelopeShaper. And that's a dramatic change in the sound. It's a much boomier sound, less emphasis on the attack of the proportions of the drums, but you can hear the snare rattle and you can hear the sustained boom of the kick drum. Back to the dry version. And now engage the lower two instances that you can see on screen of EnvelopeShaper. A much tighter sound. A little bit more emphasis on the initial transient of the drums. And the sustained portion of the drums has been de-emphasized, giving a tighter feel to the kit. dry. Boomier sound. A tighter sound. So I've now slowed the tempo down to 80 beats per minute. Let's hear the unprocessed version of the drums. Let's engage the upper two instances of EnvelopeShaper. Back to the unprocessed version. And now the lower two instances, tighter sound. Now change the tempo up to 120 beats per minute. Again, let's hear the unprocessed version of the kit. Now we'll engage the upper two instances of EnvelopeShaper. It may be that at that tempo, with this performance style, it may start to get in the way of other elements within the mix. Back to the unprocessed version. And now the tighter version again. And it may be that at this tempo, with other elements in the mix also competing for space, that tighter drum sound actually works better. And in a specific mix context, you can simply go in and fine-tune the settings of EnvelopeShaper to get exactly the right fit for your drums within the overall mix of the project. Of course, you can use compression to achieve something similar to the results we've got here with EnvelopeShaper, particularly if you're prepared to stack a couple of different compression options onto a drum channel and configure those. But given the really simple control set that EnvelopeShaper offers, how easy it is to configure, it's really worth exploring as a means of shaping your drum sounds. EnvelopeShaper is such a modest little plugin, and whether used alongside other dynamics options or not, it provides a great way to adjust the character of your drum sounds, adjusting and finessing the balance between the attack part of the sound and the sustain portion of the sound to suit your musical needs. However, it's not just for drums. Well, it can do a great job with strummed acoustic guitars, for example. So if that's something that you might like to see a video on in the future, just drop a comment below and I'll get back to that topic at a future date. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. If you like this kind of Cubase related content, please do check out the links in the video description below to the Cubase workshop articles in Sound on Sound magazine, for example, or to my Cubase Essentials course that you can find on the Udemy platform. Thanks very much for watching, and until next time, I hope you enjoy getting some music made.